noticed in my little comment earlier is that their command had been severely disrupted. The Battle of Stoney Creek, their two commanding generals were both captured by the British, Generals Chandler and Winder, and as a result, they relied on somewhat of a council of war, so officers would gather and discuss things, and that doesn't create an immediacy to the troops, and as a result of caution, they began to fall back, leaving behind supplies and equipment. And when the soldiers themselves were losing a lot of morale, believing they were alive, believing they were going to push the British out of Upper Canada, and Stoney Creek had been a serious setback for their attempts. Now you notice the Americans have some of their militia scattered out the middle here. This is important. The army on the move, even in camp, would rely on what are called pickets. Pickets were human trick dogs. You'd spread them out around your forces. They would be spread out into light companies and little groups. And the idea was that they countered the enemy. They're not going to cause serious damage. They're meant to delay them, to kind of reconnoiter what's coming at you, and alert the main body to what is coming. So you can see the British responding in kind with their own skirmishers, not wanting to fall into a trap, but deploying their own scouts and skirmishers ahead of them. In particular, I'll point out the troops you see there for the British in the green are soldiers of the 2nd York. The 2nd York Militia was a militia regiment raised out of the York area, what we today we call Toronto. And the militia, basically, it was a part of citizenship. If you're an able-bodied male, you're in the militia. That's all there is to it. During peacetime in the United States and Canada, the militia had a rather low reputation. That was because they didn't train very often, at most maybe 2 or 3 times a year. The training basically, they would gather in a central location, usually on a holiday, and they would, do a little bit of foot drill, show they could operate the musket, and then they would partake. So those that were serving in the longer term, they would try to get them uniforms and equipment. So what you see them wearing is a makeshift uniform that was actually out of purchased bulk cloth that they had available. And later in the war, they would be able to replace a lot of green uniforms with this traditional British red coat out on the field. And you'll see another British militia unit, the Incorporated Militia of Canada, in those scarlets. We got a good ooh from the American volley. The volley is the best way to fight 200 years ago. We always get people asking, who's going to be started, kneel down, lie down. No, standing's the best way. It's spread out. Big groups better. And it's because of the weapons. Now, most of the men out on the field today are carrying flintlock smoothbores, which means it uses a flintlock mechanism to fire, and there's I got competing voices behind me. So the problems with that is a flintlock, mostly exposed to weapons. Watch when they're firing. There's a flame right in front of their face. That's the pan igniting from the flint striking steel to the powder that's within there. That flame travels through a small hole in the base of the barrel called the touch hole, and it ignites the charge. The problem with this is being exposed to the elements. A lot of things can go wrong. Even just getting the gun a little bit dirty is going to affect its ability to fire. And black powder is filthy. So these weapons can very quickly become sticks in a hurry. So you have an unreliable gun, and I mentioned smoothbore. So there's nothing to help with its accuracy. At 60 yards or so, you could aim and hit an enemy soldier if you really know what you're doing. But for the average guy, good luck. Most battles in this time period were fought anywhere from 100 to 200 yards away, and at those ranges, your margin of error is 9 to 18 feet. So you have an inaccurate, unreliable weapon. How on earth do you make it effective? Mass firepower. By firing in this voltage, enough to that you are going to have enough men across the battlefield, you're going to hit something. Now, fighting in this fashion does produce one more problem. When they fired, you notice how much smoke is created. Black powder produces 20 times its own volume of smoke, and it did not take long on a clear day for the smoke to choke the battlefield, where you have thousands of rockets and cannons firing pounds of gunpowder. The fog of war made it difficult to identify the enemy foe. So I'm sure every single one of us has thought the same thing while on Earth. Standing up in a big line in a red outfit with a white shoot me here X on your chest. Well, I just told you why you didn't notice that. The red is because of the smoke. In the thick smoke, you wanted to have a uniform that would help identify you quickly to your friends and your allies. The British would wear red because when they first formed a national army, red was the cheapest dye. That's the same reason why we paint barns red. And then, for the Americans, gave them in the American Revolution. So red and blue, you notice there's green, there's gray, there's militia wearing whatever they have on top of it. Unfortunately, on a black powder battlefield, the odds are everybody will shoot at you. At the Battle of Lundy's Lane, one of the Canadian regiments wearing green lost more to the British than they did to the Americans. Because on this field, you shoot first and ask questions later. Then you get to survive. In the crowd? Well, you'll all be pleased to hear we have another regiment on the field that is 100% Canadian. Now, some of you already know this joke. Yeah, they're fighting for the Americans. Right next to them here, wearing the green bands on their hats and the white cockades, are soldiers of the Canadian Volunteers. Canadian Volunteers were raised out of primarily the Niagara region, with diverse Hamiltonians in there, including one of your members of the be aware of those elected types. But the Canadian Volunteers numbered at their highest strength about 150, and they served throughout the tail end of the 1813 campaign and all throughout 1814 in the Niagara. They had a lot to lose. If they lost the war, they would lose all of their property in Canada, and if they were captured, many of them had already been tried and sentenced. Treason was death by hanging, drawing, and quartering. And I'm sure many of you are thinking, well, that seems a bit extreme. We did execute 8 people for treason during the War of 1812 by hanging, drawing, and quartering. So it's not. Now, the commander of the Canadian Volunteers, his name was Joseph Wilcox. He was actually a member of the legislature for Niagara. And in 1813, he actually burned his own constituency down when he burned the village of Newark in the winter of 1813. The good news? He got the best end he could hope for as a Canadian. He was killed at the siege of Fort Erie and buried in Buffalo. cuffs and collars on their coats. That'll tell you a little bit about what regiment you're looking at. Every regiment, the British Army, had unique lacing, which is that white taping you see on their chest. They had unique cuffs and collar colors, unique buttons, just some way to help identify them on the field. So, for example, closest to the crowd is the 41st, which is red with red cuffs and collars. Usually because they look a lot like here, and there's a simple reason why they dress better than the men, and it's the same reason why other people dress better than me. They can afford it. Officers in this time period in both armies were expected to purchase their own uniform, their own weapons, their own equipment, everything. So it's extremely expensive to be an officer, and I'm sure you're all wondering why on earth are you spending all this money to get shot at? Well, there's national pride, of course, but there's also the lure of what you get as a good and competent officer. Good officers in the British Army could win land, title, promotion, and become very rich and powerful. In the United States, they could actually cash into political power, running for political office as an officer. If you don't believe me, 4 presidents came out of the War of 1812. You have William Henry Harrison out on the frontier, you've got down south Andrew Jackson with the Battle of New Orleans. Also on the frontier, the young captain Zachary Taylor. And last but not least, of course, Sam Houston fighting down south. He was president of Texas, so it counts. Now, in terms of British officers, an excellent example of an officer doing well for himself is a young man who was a hobbies, getting drunk and playing the fiddle. He proposed marriage to a young girl, and she refused him for obvious reasons. So he burned his fiddle and joined the army. He ended up serving in India, Europe, and by the end of his military career, you wouldn't dare think of him as a drunkard with a fiddle. No, he was a lord. He was a viscount, a field marshal of the British Army, knighted by His Majesty the King. He had 5 mansions in the States and a wealth that today would exceed £40 billion. Most people at that point called it Wellington. Now the downside is, if you are an officer, the casualties are very high. Officer casualties are significantly higher than enlisted men because in order to win those promotions, in order to win those prizes and that fame, you had to be a brave and competent officer, which meant being in the thick of battle. I mentioned 2 generals were captured from the Americans during the Battle of Stoney Creek, but in some it was even worse. At the Battle of Stoney Creek, there were 5 generals on the battlefield, and at the end of it, 1 had not been shot. He had 3 bullets in his hat, 5 through his coat, and 3 horses killed under him during the battle. So it's risky, it's expensive, but if you can make it through it as a brave gentleman, you can win yourself some fame and glory. Historically, the American withdrawal was a stutter step, as the Americans withdrew to try to find a new defensive location to set up and resist the British as they were pursuing them. And their major stop that they made was on the 40-Mile Creek. I always remember that location because there's a distillery there I quite like. I'm not paid by them, don't worry. And they set themselves up there and waited for reinforcements and hopefully for the United States Navy to come and support them as they head to the Battle of They saw sails on the horizon, lit out a cheer, not the American Navy, it was the British fleet that had come. The Americans actually had run back to Sackett's Harbor because the British had launched a raid there, and it caused the American command to be so terrified to lose his base that he withdrew off the lake entirely, surrendering the initiative on the lake. Now with the Royal Navy out on the lake, the British could pick up their forces and drop them behind them. So the Americans were forced to withdraw again, this time in even more haste than they did from Stoney Creek, abandoning even more valuable equipment. As you see casualties going down upon the field, often I have people ask me, what was, like, did they have medics? Did they have anybody to help out with that? Not really. At most, maybe one of the drums would come out and drag your body out of the line so it wouldn't clog up the line. But basically, if you were injured, you either had to lay there until somebody could take care of you, usually well after the battle, or if you were lucky, you could drop you and you could walk back. Have the surgeon take a look at you. Surgeons in this time period get a bad rap. They kind of sound like a bunch of butchers, but many of them were very confident and compassionate in their treatment. The most common treatment they had was actually amputation. Complex breaks in the arm could be fixed, but it's extremely difficult if you were dealing with large numbers of wounded. Well, as one surgeon put it, you often had to make complex wounds simple wounds by art of the knife. Amputation could be completed in as little as 2 minutes, and you were glad for it. There's no anesthetics, and one of the key things you wanted out of a surgeon this time period was youth. You wanted a fast hand, not a learned hand. The surgeon I quoted before was 19 years old when he was a surgeon, and he had already been in service for 2 years. Some of His Majesty's Indigenous allies. Much of the Six Nations were very concerned when the British fell back all the way to Burlington Heights, fearing that they would continue their retreat and abandon them. They were prepared, if necessary, to support an ally with the Americans. Many of them had openly rumored, and the British were terrified of using this ally potentially abandoning them. Luckily, with Stoney Creek and the American withdrawal, they were able to rekindle this relationship, and many of the nations came out and supported the British during the withdrawals of the Americans, which was terrifying for many of the Americans. Many of the Americans had never seen an Indigenous person in real life, unaware of their culture, any of that. The only thing they heard was what was in the newspapers at the time, or what somebody was shouting about on the street corner, and it was not known for its accuracy. There are Americans that they believe that a Mohawk warrior stood as tall as 8 feet and had razor-sharp talons to rip your heart out of your chest, and I see people laughing because agree, that's absolute nonsense. We know they're human beings like you and I. But if that's what you think is coming at you, most of the Indigenous allies, you didn't see them at first, you heard them. Their war cries carrying across the field, and it doesn't matter how learned of a man you are, some man becomes real, and the fear is intense. And we've got the artillery moving out with the British as well. The American artillery safely ensconced to the rear. Artillery was described by Frederick the Great as the king of the battlefield, making war civilized. Artillery was one of the most gruesome items out on the field, like weapons we have today, tested by the British, and they found that a range of 450 yards had the potential to cleave through anywhere from 13 to 19 human beings. Ready to do a bloody mining? See me after, I'll tell you how they found that out. Now, one of the biggest concerns with artillery is if you get too close, they might use what's called canister shot, or grape shot. command, sounding like fabric being torn. So the Americans historically withdrew all the way back to Fort George, and after that they would not make any serious attempts out of the fortification. Their one small attempt they would do would be to have Beaver Dams, where the Canadian Heroine Laura Secord would help warn the British and the Americans captured wholesale. But as the battle is drawing down and the forces are settling in, we as reenactors, we have a strong appreciation for history, and it is a tradition amongst ours that at the end of engagements we pay a lament by playing music and a recognition of those who fought for the grounds of the forest. So ladies and gentlemen, during the playing the lament, I ask you to please observe silence, and if possible, please remove your caps.